Okay. So our topic of discussion, this is why Mr. S had brought me in today, was to discuss a little bit more about water. I'm assuming that y'all are going to start entering like a water quality section, meaning that we have several different types of parameters that we test to ensure that the health of the river is good quality, and it's in reciprocity with human, plant, and animal life, as well as all of the hydrological benefits of having a healthy watershed. Um, we're in this moment of climate crisis as we start to experience the impacts of climate change, especially here in the Southwest. We're considered a arid environment, mostly desert, but we have a lot of mountain and forested areas, which are very vital to our snowpack. They're vital to our water, what they would call a water budget, but like our amount of water, our quantity of water is really dependent on a lot of the snowpack over the winters. And this year in particular, we're experiencing a very, very dry year. A very dry year to the point where the one of the institutions that governs our water is suggesting that farmers don't even farm this year. That's how bad things have gotten. And so we have to think about different creative and innovative, but also indigenous ways to conserve our water, to allocate water, what you say, equitably, so like fairly and justly. And so I'll just explain a little bit about how I got into this work, and then we can go over the water quality testing kits that Mr. S I think is gonna, or that you all already have, and you can ask me questions about the relationships between like hydrology, biology, and chemistry. Water is a very complex topic, so I'm here to help in any way I can. Okay, so I will get started. Okay, so we're here in Tiwa territory. I just wanted to give a little bit of geographic understanding of what we call the Middle Rio Grande. So there are 6 Middle Rio Grande tribes that have all settled along the Rio Grande. And that's Cochiti, Giwa, SF, Santana, Sandia, and Nasleta. All of these pueblos are considered Middle Rio Grande pueblos, so they definitely have a stake in how this sub-watershed is being managed, what types of ways are we taking care of our river, and all of the kind of policy and governmental things that come in with water as well. But I'm from Sandia Pueblo, so Sandia is just situated right in between the mountain range, Sandia Mountains, and the Middle Rio Grande, what you would call this riparian zone right here. So the cottonwood trees that you see, like say you're flying in and you see like all of this riparian zone, that's like what we would call, everybody calls the bosque. So the bosque is a very interesting topic in itself because the Middle Rio Grande did not always look like this. During the 60s, there was Cochiti Dam was built, and I don't know if y'all have ever been to the lake, or that's what they would call a reservoir. It's a floodplain reservoir, meaning that Cochiti Lake Reservoir is to make sure that the Middle Rio Grande isn't flooding out, because we want to utilize our water to, like, every single drop of water we have, we want to, like, they've been wanting to use for agriculture. We have to make sure water makes Texas and make sure it meets Mexico and all of the other water compacts and international treaties. But it's really changed the characteristic of the Middle Rio Grande, and that's why you have this like riparian forest right here. So in Sandia, we've been doing several different types of restoration projects. Down here, we have some retention ponds that definitely do encourage diversity of different vegetation, as well as microinvertebrates and other types of aquatic life that are necessary and for the health of the overall ecosystem in the bosque area. We've also been working on revitalizing populations of certain animals that that definitely have been displaced from the bosque, whether that was because of increase of human population, development, people like to live in the bosque. There's lots of houses in the bosque that displace animals and such like that. So Sandia has reintroduced the native species of turkeys, and just really working to ensure that our animal relatives are also benefiting from this ecosystem. But also we have to include us humans a part of this ecosystem, and as Pueblo indigenous people, we have designated sacred sites that are definitely a part of these restoration projects to ensure that they continue to be protected, they continue to last throughout time. Because like with Sandia and also all of the other, tribes that all of the tribes really have a very spiritual and cultural relationship with our water. So even here in the Middle Rio Grande, I know that we call the river our river mother. We see her as a living feminine energy, a living feminine entity. We refer to her as the Beitla Shiri and Keowei. So she has like personhood. And so, this perspective is really important when you're coming up with sustainable solutions, whether that's around energy, whether that's around soil quality or sustainable agriculture. All of those things that you all had mentioned that you were interested in really does impact the overall health of the river and the entire watershed. So it's really important to make sure that we recognize the system as what we would call like an integrated system, or a social, what is it called? Like a social ecological system, an SES. So the reciprocity that we have with the river and vice versa is how I think we should be managing our waterways. And so with that, I wanted to also just share like my kind of journey through water, through this career path. When I was about y'all's age, I really didn't know that there were like jobs where I could be working outside, that I could be, in the water. I didn't know that those types of jobs existed until, after I was already done with college. By the time I graduated with my undergrad, it was in 2013. And I was accepted into a water resources technician program through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And me with, I think, what was it? Like 9 other students, all natives from all over the place. We met, we're certified as water technicians, and that's when I started working with Fish and Wildlife Service for a couple years. I worked with their water division. So here we were actually just doing something pretty simple, like installing it's basically like a ruler to see like where flow is, and how high or how low the water table is. And then I went into some more environmental education. So here, I'm working with students looking at macroinvertebrates. Macroinvertebrates are very important to understanding the health of the river. So you can tell that water is good quality water if there are certain abundance of macroinvertebrates like mayflies or caddisflies or other types of macros that will eventually turn into other food sources for other aquatic life as well. And then also kind of like what I'm doing here today, which is great, is teaching about water quality on the chemistry level. So those kits that you all have certain parameters like testing for pH or phosphorates or nitrates. You know, those are all, those are that's like the water chemistry. So there's different types of ways you can study water. You can study the hydrology, which is happening here, and that's its flow, that's its movement. You know, I think somebody had mentioned hydropower. That's another way we generate power, is like through the strength of rivers on waterways. Also understanding the biology of water, so what types of organisms and are thriving from water environments, whether that be, again, macroinvertebrates or certain types of algae or things like that, that, you know, exist because whatever the water quality is. And then again, the chemistry level, where you're looking at pH and things like that. So I'm currently a graduate student at UNM. I'm a dual degree master's student, so I'm getting my master's in water resources and community and regional planning. Planning is a discipline within the School of Architecture, and that is just like understanding like governments, institutional arrangements. So who's in charge of what, and how can we plan for more sustainable, you know, projects or around whatever it is. It could be water, it could be developing downtown, like building buildings. It could, you know, it could do all those types of things. And so I am also a research assistant under the Center for Water and Environment. And so part of my research is, you know, understanding the institutional arrangements of the Middle Rio Grande. So a lot of the policy work, but also integrating like more indigenous and sustainable solutions and management strategies in order to address things like climate change and things like that. So it's really fun. This is all at UNM, and I'm really happy that I discovered this program and happy to be a part of it, and hopefully I'll be done pretty soon. But as Mr. S was saying, I am the current Alliance Director for Pueblo Action Alliance, and this is another side of water. This is another side of environment type of work, is advocacy and raising awareness and education, and also, you know, bringing in other indigenous issues that revolve around our environment and things like that. So an example of a campaign that we've been very much involved in is the protection of the Greater Chaco region. I'm sure a lot of you know about this issue. You know, it's one of our central sacred areas, and it is being infringed on by the oil and gas industry. So again, talking about climate and energy, how is this type of industry, you know, negatively impacting us, our communities, our ways of life? You know, it's very integral that we ensure that there are greater protections in places like this, but also a chance for indigenous perspectives on, you know, how we don't want oil and gas for our futures, and we feel like we have like the solutions in order to build a better future, better environment for all of us in our communities. So I've been doing this work for it'll be almost 5 years now. So it's been a lot of fun. So hopefully y'all will be able to interact with Pueblo Action Alliance more, and just always, you know, reach out to me if you guys ever have any ideas, or I know it's hard during the pandemic, but any way we can help you all out, let us know too. Because it's also allowed us all these other cool opportunities to you know, put out these campaigns that are around, you know, like land back, and, you know, we like me being in the water world, you know, have been working with our coworkers to develop this other water back campaign, which is basically a way for us to really rethink how we're viewing water, how we're understanding water, and how Indigenous communities, if they have like the if they have the say so over how our waterways are managed, that we could actually ensure like better futures and protections and things like that. And I know that our tribes are working really hard to make sure that they are protected by government policy or whatever, but they're also bringing in like the cultural and spiritual aspects of water. So this is our Water Back campaign, our Water Back manifesto. And so if you all ever get a chance to check it out, it's on our website at puebloactionalliance.org. So visit our website and take a look around, and you know, hopefully a lot of these campaigns and this work aligns with, you know, some of your thinking, but always looking for feedback as well. So yeah, I wanted to open things up for any questions anybody may have before I kind of got into like the water testing kits, but thanks for listening to me go on and on. But any opportunity,
or like something that we could implement, that could be implemented today, that would give a specific community like more autonomy, or just maybe some more examples. But specifically when I was reading that, I thought it would be great. They're all so important, but 4 stood out to me as like we should really just like, I would love to just read that out loud or something, or
sure, yeah,
and talk more about it.
We can do you want me to just read 4, or do you want me to read them all?
How about, can we have a student read number 4 out loud?
Yeah,
That'd be cool. It's always great to have student voice.
Yes.
I can read number 4.
Yeah, I knew you would. Thanks, Lori.
In order for Indigenous communities to declare their independence from the U.S. empire, we have to develop our own water infrastructure to ensure we have water resources for generations to come. We must look for solutions that sever our dependency from federal assistance that infringe on our tribal sovereignty and self-determination.
Ooh, I definitely like hearing other folks read this. It makes me happy.
Me too. It's so powerful.
Yeah, so you know, just from the various tribes that, you know, are on this call today, I think about Hopi and Navajo in particular, that are places where we don't have water infrastructure, meaning that there isn't like development for running water to even be in the homes of people. You know, hauling water is very common in a lot of the Southwest tribes, you know, which puts us in this really weird position of our sovereignty, because we aren't able to fully exercise that sovereignty because of the lack of infrastructure that we have in our communities. And that brings us to have to rely a lot on the federal government, to whether that's to give us money or to give us, you know, the resources that are needed in order to, you know, have these watershed, have water infrastructure in our communities. And so what we're saying here is that, you know, in this greater conversation about land back and water back, having water infrastructure per each sovereign nation is very vital in order for us to separate ourselves from, you know, the US empire, to decolonize our water rights, to decolonize the way water is being managed. It gives us more autonomy, just like energy, you know, like P&M is the energy monopoly that we all have to pay in order to get our energy. But say your tribe is investing in solar energy, that's energy infrastructure that is under your control, under the tribe's control, community's control. So that's your autonomy over this project. and it alleviates like it alleviates having to, pay your money outside of your own like micro economy, if that makes sense. So your community essentially is benefiting from the infrastructure that you have versus having to rely on somebody else. And I think that's what we're trying to say here, is that if we find different innovative ways in order to build our own infrastructure, then we can exercise our sovereignty. We won't be so dependent on the US government. And, just by history in itself, that we haven't had a friendly relationship with the US government. And we want to make sure that we're protecting our communities, or protecting our culture, our languages, all of the things that make us who we are. We can protect that if we are able to be more autonomous with our infrastructure. Yeah.
Fantastic. That was amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, no, and then just I think it's important to also just point out too that like this is also a way that we can reclaim the river's identity, not as like a resource, but as a mother, as a living entity. And if I'm not sure if you all know, but New Zealand was very successful in reinstating human rights to their river. And this was advocated by the Maori people. They advocated that she have human rights, so any violations against her is now a human right versus an environmental justice issue. So that's also very integral to how we're thinking about water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Do any other students have anything else come up right now, or before we move on? Crickets. All right. All right. Well, if anybody has any questions, just put them in the chat.
So, these are pretty cool little kits. I've used these many times before. They're called Lamont Water Testing Kits. I actually used to work for this organization called Earth Force a while ago, but we used to do a lot of water quality monitoring. And so again, water quality monitoring is to understand on a biological, on a chemical, and on a hydrological level the health of river, waterways, streams, the overall watershed. And so collecting samples and testing for several different types of parameters can help you understand like what is actually going on in the river, and maybe can help lead you to questions around, okay, is the geomorphology or the geology affecting the water, water quality? What happens when we have flash floods and storms and the runoff water, and when it enters into the river again, like, is it going to chemically change the water? Even after fires, when fires happen, it severely changes the watershed. And we've seen many times that when fires happen and then when rain happens, you can have these severe flash flooding events. One of the more historical, recently, like contemporary case studies was the Los Conchas fire in 2014, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. Anyway, huge fire in the Valles Caldera that was followed up by a historical flash flood, to the point where all of the runoff from that flood was affecting the water quality so bad that downstream Albuquerque was being affected by that, and actually had to turn the city's water off just so that flood could pass, so things like this can and will happen actually as we experience more shocks from climate change as we move on into the future, which is why it's super important, to have people like y'all think about different ways that we can, different ways we can stop our resource exploitation that is causing the greenhouse gas effect. But anyways, off my soapbox, the parameters in this test are the biochemical oxygen demand, chlorophyll bacteria, dissolved oxygen or DO, nitrates, pH, phosphates, temperature, and turbidity. And so all of these parameters can help you understand what is going on in the water. So, for example, when you're testing for biochemical oxygen demand, that is to understand how the aquatic life, whether those are organisms or macroinvertebrates, are absorbing the oxygen that's in the water. So that is also very comparable to dissolved oxygen. So like water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. And so, but there's different levels of oxygen that can exist in the water. So imagine like a fast flowing waterfall, and it's that even when you're whitewater rafting in the white water, it means that water is moving pretty fast, and it's generating a lot of oxygen, whether that's pulling in atmospheric oxygen or just generating oxygen like in the water, versus like maybe a puddle of water that has been sitting there for a little bit, maybe start turning green, maybe start is looking a little raunchy, and that's because there's a lack of oxygen generated in that water. So I imagine that you all would assume that a fast flowing river would be a lot healthier than a stagnant puddle of water. When you're testing for chloroform bacteria, you're actually testing to see what kind of fecal matter is in the water. You go into the bosque, right, and you see all these ducks and geese and fish and all these other animals. I'm like, where do you think they go? They go in the river a lot of the time. So you will find traces of chloroform bacteria every single time you test for river water. But that may be different when you're testing drinking water, right? So if you have chloroform bacteria, high traces of it in your drinking water, you probably want to raise that issue, because that's the water you're drinking, and you definitely don't want to drink anything that has like a high chloroform bacteria concentrate. And then we're also testing for nutrients in the water as well. So nitrates and phosphates are 2 of the more common nutrients that you will test in water. If you're having like high traces of nitrates and phosphates, you might even want to attribute that to runoff episodes. So imagine like a big rain event in the city, and all that water comes down into a catchment. And if it's not treated or anything like that and goes into the river, you're bringing all the crud from the city, in the water back into the river. You're going to have issues, you're going to have some chemical issues on that level. So that's why we test for nitrates and phosphates. pH is the potential hydrogen. So how acidic is the water. We definitely like to see water in that 7 to 6 kind of neutral range. When you start to have more like alkaline, like more alkalinity in the water, you have to figure out whether that's because of the interaction with the geology or the geomorphology. Sometimes streams, mountainous streams, are a little bit more acidic than like main stem waterways like the Rio Grande. So, that can kind of tell you a lot. And that is usually also in relation to conductivity and how the water is moving and interacting. But then like temperature is super important. You're probably not going to have a lot of things living if the water is too hot, or if it's too cold, so understanding like what types of species thrives in different temperatures of water. A lot of our like macro invertebrates and even like silvery minnows definitely like those warmer types of waters that were historically created by like swales and things like that don't really happen anymore because of the channelization of the river and things like that. And then turbidity. I mean, I don't know if you all have ever seen the Rio Grande, but pretty turbid waters, meaning that it's brown, it's turbid brown. There's a lot of fine soils and grains that change the color of the river often. That turbidity doesn't necessarily mean that it's dirty, but that it's just has a lack of clarity. And so all of these things interconnect with each other. They all like speak to each other some way or another. And it's still something that even like in my level of education, I'm still trying to figure out how they all kind of work together. But it's definitely fun to collect data, see how it interacts with each other, and then try and figure out like maybe why that's happening. So yeah, those are these kits, very easy to use. And then the instruction book will also give you some more details over each testing parameter. So I don't know if folks have any questions, but I am here to answer questions. Maybe might need to have a follow-up as we